I recently have been talking a little bit about history, and I mentioned Oswald Mosley. Oswald in politics, I think, is very interesting, charismatic, and a long but short political campaign during the 1930s to 40s. This fascist politician, right after Mussolini, goes on a year-long political campaign. So here is the inaccurate guide to Oswald Mosley, and what is his past and what happened to him up until his death. So if you don't know who Oswald Mosley was, he was a fascist politician during the 1930s to 40s. And he would pretty much, before then, his early life would be, he would actually be related to royalty at least. He would come from a wealthy family, and he was born in Westminster. And he would obviously eventually get married and also have a couple of children. I can't remember the children's names specifically, but I know that when he had children, he also eventually had an affair, not with someone else, but of his wife's sister, and then ended up having an affair with his wife's mother, which you could say was a bit of a dog, or as some people would put it. But Oswald Mosley, obviously his history there would be very interesting of what he would be doing, obviously outside of when he started getting into politics. And when around during the 1920s or 30s, I think that Oswald Mosley, pretty much when he went into politics, he started to be in the Labour Party, and eventually he ended up going to Conservative, or he would be pretty much joining a bunch of other parties. And I forgot to mention this, he actually served during World War I, but he was only really short term, or at least because I think he was a fighter pilot for the RAF, if I can remember correctly. And he pretty much, what ended up happening was, during, at least, he would do a couple of other things. He would do like stunts or acrobatic or whatever it's called, and just fly the plane around, do some tricks. And eventually what ended up happening was he ended up crashing and having a really really bad injury that would affect his ankle, and eventually he would pretty much walk around with a limp or use like I think it was just like a walking stick. And after that, he would obviously get into politics and eventually become into, or at least go into fascism. And he was inspired by Mussolini and the black shirts, and why he would pretty much wear black shirts at a lot of the rallies that he would be at. And obviously he was inspired by Hitler as well. And Oswald Mosley really wanted to pretty much try and get into power, but the problem with Mosley, eventually he just really didn't end up getting into power, and his political campaign was obviously very flawed, and obviously he probably would have done a lot better if he just got a militia and took over the UK. But I guess that would just be more like theory, or at least I guess what would happen in an alternate timeline. And Mosley would then eventually end up getting outcast from mainstream politics. And eventually what ended up happening with Mosley, but he would do a few rallies, and one of the rallies, which was the Battle of Cable Street, if I can remember correctly. And what ended up happening was that there was kind of this myth of what ended up happening with, there was a couple of riots in London, and a lot of people said, the Battle of Cable Street was fighting off fascism, but it actually wasn't, because I remember correctly that Oswald Mosley actually had a really large following, even more than the Conservative Party, and he wanted change for Britain, and he wanted Britain to be more, I guess, nationalistic or something, at least, obviously more fascist. But I guess what I'm trying to say is that Oswald wanted to really lead Britain, and he said that Europe, at least ever since World War I, he said that Europe's, or at least the United Kingdom, has been very flawed and it's failed, and he wants to try to rectify that, so to speak, in politics. And eventually he would pretty much have the Battle of Cable Street. And a lot of people didn't actually know this is actually a myth. It was actually about communism, and actually about people just fighting in the streets over communism. Because I think because of the following Mosley had, and to do with communism, I think it was probably a little bit less popular then, at least with Mosley. At least I can remember from, at least when I was looking at Oswald Mosley's history. And what ended up happening up until, or at least after World War II, where Mosley was, I think it was like a security thing, if I can remember correctly. It was pretty much, what ended up happening was that all of these people would pretty much just investigate him, or just at least being vindicated or something, where he would we're not seen as a threat or something after World War II, and pretty much just not end up happening to go to prison for his political. And sort of after, he would pretty much do rants, or at least do lectures on the capitalists in India and China, and there was a few other speeches that he did. And a little fun fact about Oswald Mosley: he actually went to Leeds and actually did a couple of speeches there, and he went to London. He went all over the UK, trying to at least get into political power. And I thought that his speeches were really good. In fact, he actually didn't even write any of his speeches down. He just did them all off by heart, which is like really interesting and really impressive that someone could actually do this. As well, he was actually featured in the Peaky Blinders episodes, and at least around season 5, where he would pretty much just do one of his speeches, and there was an attempted assassination, which the attempted assassination wasn't as different as you would have imagined. He wasn't actually being able to get shot. I think it was when he was at least in Leeds, or at least somewhere else, he would pretty much end up, I think that was it, Liverpool, he pretty much ended up having a rock thrown at him, and he ended up getting a massive bandage. So the Peaky Blinders episode wasn't so inaccurate, but yeah, a lot of people did hate Mosley, especially because he was politically outcast from mainstream politics. And the episode was very interesting about when he went into Labour, and then the Peaky Blinders ended up having how he got into politics and why he became a fascist politician. And obviously Thomas Shelby standing there with him because he wanted him as his security at least, and a few of and accurately, Mosley actually did have a few people from Scotland that he would hire for as security as well, which obviously he was very wealthy, so he could afford to actually be able to do that, and also a lot of campaign and all of his advertising as well. So anyway, hopefully you've enjoyed this video about me talking about Oswald Mosley, the inaccurate, or at least what he did during politics during the 1930s and 40s, and what happened up all the way up to his death until 1980, because Mosley had a few different health problems I forgot to mention, but it wasn't a very 100% a full healthy man. And as well, if you want to click on these videos here where I've talked about historical figures, maybe like someone who's written some work like David Irving, and also someone like with Norman Finkelstein with the Holocaust industry, I'll talk about those a little bit more in detail. And before you click off this video, I actually have a link in the description below to my main channel or my second channel, where I have my link tree to my other channels and also my Discord.